I will call this meeting of the Transportation Bond Oversight Committee to order. It is 4:03 p.m. on October 5th.
Okay, hi everybody, Joe Dills. We have a couple of the usual housekeeping items, minutes and public comment, but wanted to kind of give a meeting overview before we get to that. So Sinclair, if you can share your screen and we can pull up that slide.
Sure. Just 1 second.
And while he's doing that, Elizabeth will rely on you to keep the head count of how many members we have in case we have to switch gears. So looking ahead,
Sorry, Joe, just to help with that, if any TBOC member does need to leave in the middle of the meeting, please go ahead and raise your hand and let us know that you're logging off before you do so. We're close to a quorum, so we just want to make sure we keep that.
FYI, this is Iman. I need to leave pretty sharply at 5.
Okay, and so if anyone else does need to leave, please raise your hand and let us know before you do so. Thank you.
Okay. So on the left here is the agenda that you all saw in the distributed materials, and this is what's posted on the website. We have a couple of refinements here that we identified as we were kind of preparing the meeting plan for the meeting. I think we may have been channeling some of the public comment that was yet to come in, but here are the updates. In red on the right is how we would suggest we walk through the draft capital improvement program materials. So after item 5, when we have a staff presentation and we get to your discussion about it, what we wanted to do was take your questions and your comments and any potential revisions that get identified through that discussion, and then pause for a moment and take public comment so that you'll have the benefit of what folks are commenting on. And then we'll come back and check in with you given the potential revisions that you may have identified, what you heard in public comment in the meeting today. Basically, it's are you ready to vote on a recommendation? The 2 choices that we've identified so far is not yet. A little more work to do. We'd come back at a subsequent meeting, or if things look close, then we'll put it together and take it from there. So I just want to let you know that we have a check-in point planned later on in the meeting to see how ready we are. Okay. All right. So that's all I had, Sinclair, on that. So let's go to the meeting summary that was distributed. Did anybody have a comment or a revision on that? Go ahead and raise your hand. Not seeing any from folks. Okay, we'll assume those are good to go as written. Thank you. And then our first public comment period, welcome visitors. We have 2 opportunities for public comment, and Mary, I'll throw it over to you to recognize folks, and I'll be your timekeeper.
Do you want me to go ahead and read the written comments that we received, or just the summary? Or
it's just summary of highlights is what we've agreed on before to give the theme, because everybody got it in writing.
right. So we just had 7 comments in support of Biped, 3 supporting Biped and additional comments, 1 regarding development and accident rates, 1 regarding Knott Road, 1 suggesting a light rail system in the region, 3 in favor of Midtown crossings, 1 regarding the north side and Deschutes River Woods accessibility, 1 regarding the Reed Market Railroad overpass, 1 prioritizing transit system improvements, and 1 for US Highway 97 ramps for Murphy Road. So 20 comments that were written into TBOC. And let's see, I see 1 hand up. Nell, it says Nell from the Environmental Center. Please state your full name before you begin speaking.
Hi, thanks. This is Neil Bonsgard from the Environmental Center. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so thanks so much for putting this together. I felt largely like this package was moving in the right direction in terms of the outline of what's been expressed both through the TSP process and with what TBOC has been talking about. A couple quick comments on the timing piece. I think that it would be prudent to give the committee more time, knowing the amount of time I had to invest, to be able to read through the proposal, recognize what was missing. I think giving some more time and pulling those resources together to be more readable by the general population, so you don't have to go back to previous cut sheets and other things to recognize what's in there and what's missing would be great. Another question that I have is with the, I assume some of these will just happen through the meeting, but the timing that's in Sinclair's presentation for the Midtown crossings, I just recognize everything being lumped together. I know the importance of doing this study, but want to make sure that the public doesn't feel like we are missing Midtown crossings in the five-year timeline that's proposed. So really having some clarity on what those timelines would look like, kind of with whatever outcomes we expect would be options from the study would be really helpful. And I also wanted to provide emphasis for the only crossing being an effective, another effective crossing, meeting the goals of east-west connectivity that I'd love to see in this first round of projects, or if we do an accelerated timeline with a larger bond issuance, including only in that group. That's what I got for now. Thank you all, and look forward to hopefully having these discussions in a later meeting.
Thank you. Okay, Gina, you could state your first and last name before your comment, please. Gina? Okay.
Hi, sorry about that. That took a second to unmute. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the opportunity to provide public comment. I am an alternate to TBOC. And in my day job, I work as a project manager for Ben Lapine Schools, and so I manage bond projects for the school district. So just based on my professional experience, I encourage the committee and the city staff to work together to actually develop a full schedule for all of the projects. Even if those later years on the schedule are in draft form only, I think a full schedule would go a long way to kind of showing how the full bond will be executed and to help everyone understand what we're prioritizing in these initial years versus what happens in later years. I also believe it's really important for, even at this point in time, for the committee to be given whatever conceptual design information exists on the projects. It is the committee's charge, to my understanding, to monitor project progress. And so I believe conceptual design info is really important to that end. And that might also be useful information even to help prioritizing these projects that we want to start early versus later. And lastly is kind of an echo to what Neil said is, you know, there's a lot of information to go through right now. You know, so grouping projects like the Midtown Crossing project, and then, you know, kind of the splitting up of other projects like the, I know the key routes had $20 million allocated to it, and then key intersections only had 1 million. You know, if there's a way that staff can do better to like kind of explain to the committee and to the community at large, really, you know, how those dollars are being allocated, it would be helpful, because as Neil said, I too spent quite a bit of time going through all the materials and the project cut sheets and, you know, kind of trying to make sense and paint a picture for myself, you know, of what is being proposed in this 5-year CIP. And I would really encourage the committee to ask staff and for staff to kind of take the responsibility and the initiative to kind of paint that picture for the committee. And that's all I have to say right now. And I'm excited for the presentation to hear what actually went into this, the thinking that goes into this 5-year CIP. Thank you.
Thanks, Gina. Okay, Karen. State your first and last name before your comment, please.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Karen Johnson. I live on the east side of Bend in the Kings Forest area. I wanted to put in a word and to urge you to consider the importance of bicycling and particularly a safe passage over 3rd. I love to bicycle. I used to bike down to the Safeway on 3rd for groceries. I don't do it anymore because crossing Reed Market is scary enough. I get to the corner of 15th and Wilson, I've got to go diagonal to go into Corner Park, and it's just scary. Having a broad white painted line is the only protection between me and cars, and it just isn't enough. I'd love to be able to bike to downtown, to bike along the river, but crossing 3rd is a nightmare. Trying to go under the Franklin underpass, we need a good place for bicycles and pedestrians so they can be above the traffic. And I urge you to consider some sort of overpass connection between east and west for bicycles and pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. There was somebody else, but I don't see them anymore. So I think that's it.
That's it? Okay. All right.
Oh, wait. I'm sorry. John, he came back.
Okay.
John, go ahead and state your first and last name.
Thank you, Mary. This is John Fisher. I live in Old Bend, and my comment is to continue to prioritize the local street safety program. I think those small local projects are of high priority to neighborhoods and to residents, and to remain flexible with alternate designs, with surface treatments that can help increase safety for neighborhoods and walking and biking within the existing neighborhood infrastructure. And also I want to comment that I encourage you to continue to prioritize the biking and pedestrian network and connecting east to west through the Midtown crossings. And that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Looks like we have one more. Corey, can you state your first and last name?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Hi, I'm Corey Harlan. And some of these comments are going to echo what you've heard from some other folks today, but just a few that I wanted to share. So also just encouraging this committee to really take the time they need to get the project list right. There was a lot to get through here, a lot of dense information. And so making sure that, you know, this project list is the best it can be, I think is important, and urge both the committee and city staff to take that time that's needed to figure that out. Would also appreciate some clear communication about the larger context that's going on here. So having that full project schedule was a great suggestion from Gina, but I think also, you know, just having a clear picture of how this all fits into the 12 key routes that were identified for biking and walking throughout the city, I think would be really helpful to see and very illustrative for the general public. I think, you know, early investments in safe, abundant walking and biking routes and improving east-west connections really need to be top priorities for this first round of funding. We know that was really central to the values and promises that were made to voters that ultimately won support for this bond. And so, you know, I think I'm here with my kind of Central Oregon Land Watch hat on. I'm the Cities and Towns program manager there. And I think, you know, as far as priority projects, we really feel the Midtown crossings need to be on this 5-year CIP list. So Hawthorne, Greenwood, Franklin, and Olney for sure, you know, and I think of those, Hawthorne really has the potential to be the most iconic and transformative Midtown crossing project there. So, you know, making sure that some of these key investments are happening in that bike and pedestrian network is going to be really vital to, you know, making sure that when we do larger, potentially more disruptive and more vehicular focused projects later in the bond, making sure that that system can really absorb those kinds of shocks that will happen to some of those bigger kind of car-focused projects. So I think that those are the comments I wanted to share at this stage of the game. I think we're also interested in seeing a larger financing option considered and presented to City Council, but I'll hold on sort of further elaboration there until after the presentation today. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Joe, I don't see anybody.
Everybody?
else.
Okay, great. I'll keep us moving forward then. Next item is to review the final project scoring, and a little context for this. This is informational, as you'll hear from Sinclair. The scores were guiding and helpful, but they are part of the thinking that went into the project recommendations. So Sinclair, over to you.
Hey, thanks. I'll share my screen real quick, pull up the final project scoring summary. So during the last meeting, we kind of got a little off track, and it took us a little longer to get through the projects than we had originally thought. So we asked TBOC to provide any sort of comments on the scoring, and we didn't receive a whole lot of feedback. So effectively, the only project score that changed over the whole scoring feedback was a change of a half circle for the Ani Street extension. So the equity went from a half circle to a whole circle, and that was the only feedback that we got during that 1 week time after the last meeting. I'm also going to highlight this project down here. I'll take responsibility for that one. That one was missed during the original scoring, but it was added to the list. It's an intersection improvements at OB Riley and Empire. Did not score very high. We had Kittleson and DKS scoring along with myself, and we applied the equity scores, the same equity scores that we applied to the Empire interchange project, since it was so close and it had the same benefits. But just wanted to highlight that that one was in fact missed with the initial scoring, but just wanted to share with everyone what kind of feedback staff got for the initial scoring.
Okay, let's open it up to any questions that anybody has on the scoring. Like I mentioned, I think you'll hear how this was used in context of other criteria, but any comments or questions on the scoring component? Not seeing any hands up. Oh, there's Scott. Go ahead, Scott, please.
Yeah, and I definitely get this is really just kind of a guidepost for us to help us base things off of. Would it be, my question is always, would it be worth potentially sort of, if there is some movement, a lot of these are big projects that are, lots of projects together. And if there's a little bit of movement in terms of maybe reconfiguring into those projects to actually like hold off on officially approving this until we have a 5-year CIP and kind of do that all together.
Not following.
So, I mean, I'm kind of like just thinking we're about to have a big, long discussion in terms of how to, putting together this 5-year CIP. And like each of these projects, for example, the Reed Market Corridor, if you look, it's a whole bunch of, it's a large project, and there might be specific portions of that are big enough to do on their own. Would it be worth potentially just not officially approving this until we have kind of gone through our deliberations?
Scott, I can help a little bit on the process side of that. You're right that this is part of kind of a larger totality of considerations into the 5-year CIP. When you approve your recommendation on the CIP, this list and this scoring is part of it. It's not an independent approval. So effectively, this agenda item is officially an informational item for us. So that might answer your question that if there's some revisions to projects, that, you know, are based on scoring considerations. They could be done as part of the deliberation on the CIP itself. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. Ryan, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, okay, maybe I'm being repetitive here, but yeah, Scott, we're not asking the committee to approve or disapprove the scoring. Like you don't need to vote on this or not. We're just,
Okay.
Sinclair took this scoring as a baseline to develop a CIP that you guys can tear apart and pull back together in any way you see fit. We were just trying to give some, you know, some goalposts along the way to work through.
Okay. All right. Good question, though. Others, any questions or comments on this? Otherwise, we'll get to the CIP itself. Scott,
I
did
do
you have one more? Go ahead, please.
One amendment then, and I apologize, Sinclair, I didn't do my homework in time. And I brought this up last time in terms of the 8th Street. So there's the intersections at 4th Street and 8th Street, both at only in Revere. And they kind of caught my eye largely because I've found myself walking along downtrodden dirt that's not on a sidewalk along that intersection of Revere. And so I was kind of looking in more detail for the 8th Street intersections. They had scored a 0 on sidewalk network completeness. And I think there are enough improvements there to give that a half circle, just there is not complete sidewalk all around those intersections. And also there's a key route along Penn only there that does a strange jog around those intersections. But I think that just in terms of the functionality and being realistic about what that intersection means to that key route, I think that it deserves a half circle on that front. So I would kind of propose, or curious if the committee would support modifying that to give it a half circle for sidewalk network completeness and for being part of a key route functionally, at least.
Any opinions around the committee on that? One thumbs up. Sinclair, any point of view? Thumbs up from Leanne. Looking like folks don't have a concern with it. I don't think it changes the scoring drastically, but captures the idea. Yeah.
Sure. And I guess just from my perspective, the reason it was a no circle is because it didn't actually make a full connection to anything. So there's a lot of missing sidewalk in that area, pretty much everywhere in that area. And it didn't make a full connection to any other piece of sidewalk or infrastructure. And that's why it didn't get a full circle or a half circle.
I think that's reasonable. I totally get it. I think that intersections are, they're always kind of a crux though, and you got to start somewhere. And, I just knowing, I actually don't travel that route that frequently, even though I live nearby it, but I know a lot of people do. And, I know that folks traveling along that key route, say from the hospital to the west side, they're not going to make a left, go by Juniper and then jog back onto it. They're going to go straight through that intersection. So just to kind of, reflect more of a realistic view of how people will be utilizing that. That's kind of why I thought I might just wanted to make that reflect in our worksheet just for the records in our guidance.
Okay.
Okay. All right. I think that's a go on that one then. All right. I'm taking here that we're okay to move on. So with scoring in mind, let's get to the staff presentation on the draft CIP and back over to you, Sinclair, for that.
Sure. So I'll try to keep this brief to leave as much time for discussion as possible, but I do want to get through this so that I can head off any questions that I think are going to be coming. So that, I think we'll just jump into it.
We're doing okay on time so far, Sinclair. So actually, just as a thought, people have been interested in the rationale and the story behind and bigger picture. So as you think of those points, please do fill them in.
Okay. So yeah, here's the presentation on the draft 5-year CIP. And I just want to, I guess, highlight that this is a a rolling program. We're going to be taking a look back, at least on a every 2-year basis, if not yearly, to address any new information that comes up. Let's say a project gets delayed due to permitting or right-of-way acquisitions. In that case, we can accelerate another project. Or let's say that there's an opportunity to pursue additional funding. We could accelerate that project so that we can use the savings that we see from the project and allocate it somewhere else. So this isn't a set in stone item. It's simply a plan for staff to implement these projects over the next 5 years. That'll get updated as we go. So some considerations that we use for sequencing, obviously the scoring that was developed through TBOC, but additionally it was the unscored criteria, and that's project readiness or unreadiness, if that's a word, and construction fatigue. And I'll point out some of those points where I kind of felt we were getting to a point where either a project wasn't ready or there was some construction fatigue associated with a certain set of projects. Strive to stay within the debt costs that were promised to the voters. So that means a $25 million package. I do have a larger package identified later on in the presentation, but we were trying to stay in that $30 to $39 range to be considerate of those who are on a very fixed income and are using the initial communication costs as a means to budget for themselves. Trying to have construction happening every year. We want this thing to be visible. We want people to know where their tax dollars are going. So, making those improvements every construction year. And then lastly, we're trying to create a plan that's achievable, an achievable workload for the staffing that was assumed within the GEO bond. The staff recommendation sized package, that's what we can do, pretty much the limits, maybe a little past the limits of what we can actually do with the staffing that was assumed for the GEO bond. Anything larger, we're going to have to spend more money on staff, which could, not promising anything, but it could actually reduce the amount of money that we can spend on projects themselves. So to kind of key up the next piece of the presentation, just want to jump back to another altered final project summary page. And so here highlighted are kind of we've got 2 buckets, essentially. We've got the highlighted projects were the projects that were included in the 5-year CIP. Then we have the non-highlighted projects, which were not included in that initial 5-year CIP. And generally it does align with the scoring with a few outliers. And I'll go through kind of the reasoning for those outliers now. So the only pedestrian and bike improvements lies directly on the pathway of a large sewer project called the Central Interceptor. And that project, it aims to increase capacity of our sewer system in the central area and the west side. If we go ahead and build this project in the near term, it's very likely to be completely demolished by that project at some point here in the near future. So what I'm trying to do is delay this project at least until the end of 2022. So over the next year, we're going to be working on an update to our sewer master plan, which will inform whether or not the Central Interceptor is still a viable project, but also identify the timing for that project. And so hopefully we can work together to implement Central Interceptor and the only project, or Central Interceptor becomes not a project. We can meet again and we can accelerate that project. The Omni East project right here, just below only, that was not included because it's highly developer driven. We don't want to get too far ahead of the developer and limit their options for developing that land. And we also don't want to get too far ahead of them because we don't want to actually have to buy the land underlying the Omni extension. We're trying to work with them so that they can dedicate the land to the city, and then we can build the improvements on top of it. A couple other outliers are improved access to transit, a little lower down on the list, and local residential safety. I think those were always looked at as a programmatic approach and putting them in place on a yearly basis rather than kind of all at once. The North Corridor project, I put that in there just to be realistic. We don't have a whole lot of control over what that when that project gets delivered. But the city's portion of that project, the 4.8 million, that was considered to be part of the second issuance. So that issuance starting in 2024. And then the last two projects that are a bit of outliers are Archie Briggs and Portland. Those are highly synergistic projects. So Archie Briggs with the ODOT Bridge project, we're going to be trying to work with them on delivery for construction. Looks like we're not going to be able to work with them through design. But Portland Avenue as well with a large water project. We think that if we can work with the other projects, we can get a whole lot more done with the same amount of money. And Dave, I can take your question right now.
Yeah, you said Ani Street East, but you pointed or you highlighted Ani Street West.
Apologies.
Ani,
yeah.
So I want to be clear on the Ani Street East is the one at the very top of the list here. You
Yes.
went to the other one.
Yes, sorry. I meant,
Which one are you talking about?
sorry, I meant Ani Street West.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So jumping back into it. So I'm not going to spend too long on this slide. This is what Sharon shared during the last TBOC meeting. Essentially what the costs are for each debt issuance and the total proceeds per debt issuance year. So not going to spend a whole lot of time there since we've already gone over it. But just want to touch real quickly on this slide, which is also shared by Sharon during the last meeting. So the blue line is what we had originally communicated to voters when they were considering voting for the GEO bond. And the red line is what this package would look like if we were to use the assumed costs on the last sheet. So the initial cost would go from $30 to $39 for the average homeowner. And then, so I revamped this schedule a tiny bit just to make it a little more legible. So here I'm showing kind of as the projects are getting implemented, this is kind of the sequencing of the project. So got 2022, 3, 4, 5. Wanted to touch on something real quick. I just want to note that 90% of the key route money, over 90%, is being spent in this time frame. The exception is the only project, just because we only do not want to end up demolishing it with another project. I'm showing a couple different highlights for the North Corridor project. So the North Corridor project is shown kind of in the light orange and one dark orange square here. They are planning to construct starting at the end of next year and following through to 2024. And then the dark square just represents when that payment will be made. So Scott?
Yeah, just on that, since you're talking about that North Corridor project, I was noting, and you've mentioned this before, and I was hoping for some more clarification. And the on the notes for that project, it says, is North Corridor project matured? It became clear that this GO bond project was congruent with the improvements associated. There's a distinct possibility that these funds could be reallocated. I was wondering if you could just kind of expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, those talks really haven't gone anywhere just yet. I don't really have an update on any of that information just yet. But definitely still working with ODOT on the implementation. Ryan might have more to say.
Yeah, thanks, Sinclair. And we've got Bob on the line as well from ODOT, so I'm sure he could respond to any specifics. But just to be transparent with this group, the city is assuming that $4.8 million will be basically handed over to ODOT as part of our contribution to the North Corridor project, focusing on the Highway 20 corridor to get that complete and built. So at this point, I'm not seeing any possibility to reallocate that. I think it's intended to go towards a contribution to the North Corridor project.
Thanks. Leanne?
Thanks. So I just want to be really clear because we didn't have a like a key when we were looking at this packet. The light orange is when the construction is going to happen for the whole project. So North Quarter, this is saying like it's going to start at the end of 2022 because ODOT money is going in at that time. And then the dark orange is when the GeoBond funds are going to be allocated. So the same with enhanced access to transit. That's all light orange because that's CET or COIC or whoever does that. And then our portion from the GeoBond is going to be this little dot in 2024. Is that
Yes,
correct?
With one caveat that the enhanced access to transit also has some small amounts of funding every year, just so that we can make improvements to transit facilities while we're working on other projects.
Okay, so how would you characterize the light orange like as this key?
Where I need additional discussion that I'm trying to give you right here.
Henry, you've had your hand up for a bit. Let's do it. Did you have it up for North Corridor?
No, I had my hand up just for, well, one, Leanne asked my question about the different colors, but I was curious on how often this CIP specifically for the bond projects will get redone. Is it a yearly basis? Is it every 3 years? How often does this get revamped?
Yeah, so we'll readdress it at least every 2 years, if not yearly, depending on what kind of new information we encounter while delivering these projects.
Yeah, Henry, we'll treat it as just like we do the rest of our CIP. So this isn't just like our water, sewer, storm, everything else. We have an opportunity at every new biennium period to revise it and revamp it. But like Sinclair said, if an opportunity arises, we could go at a random time to city council if that's what we collectively feel like we need to do. But generally, there's a midpoint biennium check-in as well that will have an opportunity. So a good example of kind of some alterations to our existing CIP is we think the bond is going to influence some of our other projects on our other CIP. So when we take this to council for eventual adoption, we're going to ask them to re-adopt the rest of our CIPs at the same time because we want to line everything up. So we don't want to do it too often because then it looks like we're not great at planning things out. But certainly if an opportunity presents itself, I'm sure council would be more than happy to have that conversation with us.
That's good. Thanks, Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
All right, keep us rolling, Sinclair.
Yeah, so I guess the last project on here that requires a little bit more explanation is the Midtown Crossings. Just want to point out that we are moving on that project already. We're not using bond funding to do that, but we are starting that feasibility study that'll come out this year. So that project is moving. And then the lighter shading is the feasibility study. And then also some of the minor improvements that don't necessarily rely on some of the larger widening or enhancing of these crossings. So it might be the key intersection improvements that happen during this lighter shaded piece of the Midtown Crossings, where there's some key route money there too. So just throwing out there that there are some minor improvements associated with that project that might get implemented in the near term. And then I redid the schedule one more time just to go by the points allocated. So highest number of points at the top, lowest number of points at the bottom. Kind of gives you an idea of where the projects live on that list. Don't want to spend too much time here. So if you want to take a screenshot, you totally can, or I can send this over to you. So now I'm going to jump over into the mapping, and I'm going to grab an actual live map to help zoom in and out. I think what you'll notice here is that the 2022 construction year is pretty well built out at this point, just because we know a whole lot about it. It's next year. We kind of should have our ducks in a row by this point on what's actually being constructed next year. So what does that include? Got the North Corridor starting at the end of next year. Newport will be continuing its construction along with our 2 small path improvement projects. We've got some local residential safety projects that we have identified. So these are crosswalks at Mount Washington, Aubrey, downtown, and then along Broster House. The Southwest Sewer Basin is continuing. We've got some septic to sewer projects here south of Reed Market. Wilson is continuing or starting, my bad. And then we've got the Neff and Purcell project along with the Purcell extension. And a quick update on that is that talks with the hospital is going well. So I'm optimistic that we can get that done next year. So moving on.
Let's take Mason's question, something on the 22 map. Mason.
Hi, yeah. Well, I just had a quick question about 9th Avenue. You have it shown as being 22 construction, but my understanding is from Reed Market to Wilson that that's not included in the 2022 construction.
Yeah, we're gonna have to take a look at that. I don't really have an update on it, but there could be a connection issue once Reed Market goes through with the overpass, that we can't quite connect it the way that we can today at the intersection of 9th and Reed. But that's something that we're just gonna have to take a look at.
All right.
So moving on to 23, continuing on with Wilson, starting out the Butler Wells roundabout along with the Butler Market pedestrian and bike improvements, along with the Boyd Acres bike improvements. North Corridor is still going on, and we got a septic sewer project down in the southeast area of town again. 2024 looks a little sparse, but I think at this point we're really ramping up on design to get a lot of these projects underway. So North Corridor project is wrapping up this year. Archie Briggs project is underway with the bridge and possibly working with ODOT to implement that trail crossing. And then kind of wrapping up the Butler, Boyd, and Wells Acres work. And then 2025 is where we really hit our stride. I think we're starting to deliver a lot more projects during this year. We've got the Portland corridor that we're looking to deliver along with the large water project over in that area. We've got the Neff corridor improvements. And so this is one of those construction fatigue projects that I wanted to point out. So in 2024, we're working on the Butler and Wells Acres roundabout. And we really don't want to be closing off this intersection and also working on Neff Road at the same time, because they're both going to be used for detours for each other. So that was one of the reasons that Neff Road got pushed out to the 2025 year, just to get the work done on Butler Market and not have those overlapping detours. Other work that we're identifying for this year is the Midtown crossings. So it's one of these kind of getting really up to speed and enhancing the crossing of the Parkway and the railroad there. Then we have the Ani East project. So this is one of those readiness projects. The project, we don't really know what the alignment is. It could be along this existing pathway of Ani Street, but it could also kind of swing down and tie into Miller here. The issue with that is that the federal government owns this lot, and we can't use eminent domain on the federal government. So the timing is a little bit up in the air on that project. So it could be that we can, tie some of these minor improvements in with like a local residential project, just to widen out the scope of the smaller project, just to make it more biddable to contractors. And then
Dave,
last,
let's pause right here, Sinclair, if we could. Dave has a question.
Yes, Sinclair, on that Ani East project, is that slated to cross over 3rd Street with any like pedestrian or bike crossing?
so it includes an intersection improvement at Miller and 3rd, but I would not anticipate that it would go down Miller. I think it would touch the northeast and southeast corners, maybe go back 50 yards or so, but I think that would be the extent of the project.
Yeah.
So it's either a roundabout or a signal there. And then the last project slated for 2025 is the beginning of the Reed Market project. So work on 15th and Reed and 15th and Ferguson, and the pedestrian improvements to 15th Street. So that's really to kind of get our detours pretty well set up for the Reed Market overcrossing project. Then we get into 26, still working on Reed Market, starting that overcrossing, starting to look at kind of the western pieces of Reed Market. So that's 3rd Street, the Reed interchange, and the Bond and Reed roundabout. And then additionally, the improvements to 3rd Street at the canal crossing where we don't have these sidewalks along that canal. And then lastly, we've got the Bear Creek and 27th goes along with the Bear Creek Pettigrew roundabout. So these are pedestrian improvements here, and then the tie over from the Coiner to the Larkspur Trail. And then lastly, we've got the longer term projects, the project that didn't make the 5-year CIP, or at least the draft that I've presented here. So those are the Parkway connections. So that's at Murphy, Powers, Colorado, Butler Market, and Empire. We've got the 4th and the 8th Street intersection projects, the Only project, Colorado Crossing project, the Ani West project, the O.B. Riley Empire project that I mentioned earlier, and lastly, the Broster House, Chase, Powers, and Peril project. Okay, so I went through all of them. And then last meeting, I had said that I would put together what I would anticipate a larger package would look like. So I would anticipate a larger package would be an acceleration of one of these projects. So either Neff, Reed, or Bear Creek. I mentioned that Neff might have some issues with construction fatigue. I think Bear Creek is a pretty good candidate if we want to go with a larger package. And Reed Market might be a good candidate in the case that we can accelerate that project, but I'm not sure that we can accelerate the bridge work any faster than 26. So it could be a pencils down type of situation between 24 and 26. So what would that larger package look like? Effectively, what I've done here is move $8 million under the assumption that you guys select an acceleration of Bear Creek 27 from the 2030 issuance to 2022. What we haven't done is looked at the staffing, management, and issuance costs. Those could go up based on how many staff we need to deliver these projects. So I don't know what this number is going to look like in the end. It's possible it could go up if we choose to accelerate. And then as a result of that higher package, we would be looking at a $52 initial cost rather than the $39 initial cost that I had shown earlier in this presentation. So that's what I had for my presentation. I guess we can open it up to questions and that kind of stuff.
Questions or comments on what's been presented so far? Mason. And we can go back to any slide or any map that you'd like.
Great. Thanks, Sinclair. That was super helpful. And I have quite a few questions. First, kind of a general one, and just kind of stepping back, like our role as a committee and committee members, we're all, volunteers here, and we're not staff members at the city. We're not intimately involved in all the other projects going on, but we are tasked with oversight of this bond as well as communicating what's going on to the public. So I would just say I was pretty disappointed in the material that was handed out prior to the meeting. It was really just the final CIP one page and Sinclair's presentation with no notes or no accompanying memo or anything. And it's pretty challenging, and especially because my goal, I really wanted to, we want to move forward on these bond projects, get this approved, get going. And, I'd hate to, delay voting and approving the CIP, but it's in order to be able to get that done, I need enough information to be able to answer all the questions, as much information as possible beforehand, before the actual meeting. So we're not taking up all the time asking these basic questions during our only 1 hour to discuss here. So I guess my question, because there's some pretty substantial changes from the scoring ranking to this final CIP, and there's, as Sinclair went over, there's good reasons for a lot of that, but we had no idea until this presentation what those reasons were. I asked some of those ahead of time just to Sinclair, but then the responses just come to me, and we're not allowed to share that with the full group or anything. And so it works a lot better. So I guess my question would be why, for the scoring criteria, evaluation criteria, there was a 5-page memo written about why we came up with the scoring criteria, but then the actual bond list, there was no memo at all accompanying it for the information for us beforehand or for the public. So that's my question, is why there was no memo accompanying these materials.
Yeah, I think it comes down to the tight timeframes that we have to turn this stuff around. This is pretty complicated to sequence all these projects and to take all this stuff into account. So this is what I could develop in the timeframe that I had.
No, I agree 100%, Sinclair, but this is also, we've got, all of us on the line, there's, several paid consultants here, and it just, a simple memo from, anyone would have been very helpful. And I think it would have just helped this whole process today be a lot more efficient and would have saved a ton of money overall in the process rather than having the delay. So that's just a general comment.
Mason, let me ask a question back. If there was a memo prepared essentially capturing the type of rationale that was just presented, sounds like that's what you're looking for, that would help you as you make decisions moving ahead, right?
Yeah, it would have been very helpful to have beforehand versus otherwise I had all these questions and then they're pretty easily answerable questions. Like I agree, you don't want to, you can only provide so much information, but just some sort of, just a quick sentence like, hey, Archie Briggs, we moved it up because of this ODOT project,
Right.
That's
Central Interceptor or whatever. Okay.
Yeah, and just having that, I think that would have been a lot better use of time than 5-page memo on the selection, the scoring evaluation criteria personally. So,
okay, let's keep moving. Leanne.
Thanks, Joe. I would just echo some of what Mason shared. It's already making me feel like, so I spent probably about 12 to 15 hours talking to community partners who were asking me about this packet leading up to this meeting in the last week. And I didn't have a lot of answers. So part of me is already kind of in the back of my head thinking about, maybe seriously considering an additional meeting. And primarily for transparency for the public. I felt like, I have a direct line to Sinclair, I can get questions answered, but this is something that I think we want to make sure that there's fair process for the public to be engaged, as we saw with the extensive public comment that came both in writing and in person. Some questions I have are, given that the CIP can be revisited every year, every other year, and in light of the extensive public comment we got around just generally east-west connectivity, and acknowledging the complications that the Central Interceptor presents, why only couldn't be slated just like the Bear Creek and 27th Street improvements, which are also impacted by the Central Interceptor, towards the end of this time period, and then this committee in a year or 2 or 3, when we have a better idea of what that's going to look like, can make the determination to either defer. And I'm thinking of this in terms of optics around what the community is asking for through its public comment, what this committee and what council has consistently relayed, and what's the former co-chair of CTAC has represented was the spirit of this GeoBond package. I'd also echo, I'd really like to see what is going to be design phase versus construction phase of the spending of this money over the 10 years. And even if that changes, right, just so that we have some context for some of this later money. And then my final question is, we were talking about, we could pull up if we had a larger financing package like Bear Creek and 27th, But I'd like to understand more about what our options are about pushing out the Reed Market corridor, which has always been anticipated by the architects of this, of the GeoBond projects to happen in the later part of this, the lifespan of these 10 years. And will that help with alleviate some of the staffing issues, right? So yes, I understand we have to have detours for readiness, but what says it has to happen in 2025 or earlier? And how do we make sure that we have all the other crosstown connectivity pieces in place to absorb the impacts that shutting down Reed Market's going to cause? So those are that's my little mini brain dump at this moment.
And could I just circle back to the only, could you restate the suggestion you just made on only? I'm not sure that I followed it.
I specifically, I think my ask is, can we pull the only Biped project into this first, this 5-year CIP, maybe place it towards the end with the acknowledgement that we still are waiting information about the central interceptor.
Okay.
For the optics around, it's gotten a lot of support. It's a project that is directly adjusting east-west connectivity that both the public, folks who are providing public comment, are providing, this committee and council has expressed as important. And if it's a no-go, right, because of the central interceptor, then it gives us time as a committee to go back and defer it later.
Gotcha. Thank you. Okay. Thanks for that. Okay. Number of hands up. We'll go Henry and then Dave.
Sure. So I just have a question about the CIP budget that was sent out as part of the meeting materials. All of those projects are identified as still being at order of magnitude cost estimates. So how much contingency was built into that budget compared to the maximum debt issuance for that same time period? Because it looked like we were spending about 75 million in a time period where there was maybe 85 million in debt issuance. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. So it also doesn't include that first part of the 27 calendar year that is that part of that second debt issuance. So I anticipate with having the Reed Market project going at that time, I anticipate somewhere in the $5 to $10 million range being added to that at the beginning of the 27 year.
I guess where I was going with the question, it was a bit of a leading question, was that I think that the committee and staff should be thinking about contingency for what happens when some of these the costs for some of these projects get greatly escalated. Our experience over the last year is bids for projects are coming in much, much higher than we expected. And it may be nice to think about what can be cut now in the situation or in the scenario where one or two of these projects that we're already pretty well committed to starts eating up a larger chunk of these costs.
Okay. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, a couple of things. I want to support what Leanne said. I liked her comments very much. And I think that in terms of like the Reed Market project, it's a huge project and it's going to have a huge impact. So if any way we can, complete some smaller projects that will, support that particular project ahead of time and reduce the construction fatigue, which is something that we all say we want to do. I also want to go back to something that Mason said about, the fact that this is pretty complicated, and precisely because it's complicated, we need to be even more clear, I think, with the community and make sure people out there understand what the city's doing. I think it's really important that the city communicate clearly and often with the community so that there's transparency in these projects. And I'm kind of concerned that, and I don't know all the nuances about, bond election or elections and levies and stuff, but I would hate to see us, not be able to have the flexibility to change this situation because of, an average of $22 a year in taxes. It just seems like that's a pretty trivial amount of money that I don't know that should hold us up from making a bigger project. I guess that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to go across my screen that I see here. So Kim and then Scott.
Sure. This follows on a little from Dave's comment about transparency. I was just a bit concerned about what's called the North Corridor Coordination Project on the list. I feel that from the point of view of people in the public and people in the committee looking down lists of projects, it's very unclear what that is. And it's hard to find details until you drill right down. My understanding is it's a widening project of the 20. And that is something that perhaps is not consistent with all the emphasis that we're hearing from people interested in more central east-west connectivity and bike-ped pedestrian stuff. But your comments, Sinclair, regarding that in the presentation, it seems that perhaps that's a non-negotiable and we're tied in with ODOT on that one.
The North Corridor project is on its way. It's nothing that we can do much about. That what the committee can do is make a recommendation to council that they don't want that money allocated to ODOT in 2024. Then it would be up to council to make that determination.
Yeah, sorry, I'll jump in real quick. And I appreciate that question, Kim. And yeah, whatever information we can share, we're happy to. That 4.8 million was intended to widen 20 in a certain stretch, and that money was allocated to do that, with the CTAC, and, when they identified this work. But the evolution of what Highway 20 is going to look like has changed dramatically in the last year and a half. So it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to spend that 4.8 money to widen this southern stretch of Highway 20. It makes a lot more sense to partner with ODOT to build the roundabouts at Cooley 20 and Roble 20 to accommodate that slowing of the vehicles along Highway 20 as you enter into town. So there was a partnering opportunity there, and it's really not that different of a shift from what the money was going to go towards anyway. But with the roundabouts getting built and better east-west access coming off of those roundabouts, we don't really need to widen that stretch of Highway 20 that the money was originally intended to do. So it's just, yeah, but Sinclair's right. And I know Bob can add to that as well.
Bob, do you want to add on North Corridor?
Yeah, I'm happy to just provide a little more context. I don't know what the group knows, but this is our $130 to $150 million project that'll start construction next year. And as Ryan mentioned, the 4.8 obviously was allocated or was earmarked ahead of time for the widening, but now that before we weren't putting a roundabout in at US 20 and Roble. We were partnering with a private developer and some additional ODOT funds that have come in to make that improvement. So the widening really isn't warranted, but obviously the roundabout costs more than the widening. So those funds are kind of matching this last match amount that, we really only have around 125 million. We're thinking we're getting another 15 here as we work towards the 150 million total. So this 4.8 was through discussions with the city over the last few years about how can it benefit the city in that corridor, and also, depending on what happens with the library and a potential Breda expansion.
Kim, does that help address the question?
Yeah, thank you. It's a lot of extra information.
Yeah, great. Okay. All right, Scott, up to you.
Yeah, since a lot of folks made some great comments, so I just kind of wanted to sort of reiterate what Leanne and Dave said in terms of, I really think that given that we can come back to this, I feel most comfortable responding to the public comments, the council goals, some of the positions we've already taken in terms of trying to build complete east-west, north-south connections, low-stress connections, and then readdressing those if things like the sewer project do interfere. you know, because it sounds like we have the time for that. I wouldn't want to push the timeline too much. And then thanks for the extra information on the ODOT project. That was kind of what I was trying to get at before as well.
Great. Okay, Mason?
So first I want just to, as far as if we do delay a vote, and if more material is could be provided, I just wanted to, there was the public comment by Gina. I think all the things she asked for would be very helpful, including the full schedule to give a larger context. And then also any concept designs that have been developed for any of the projects. And then I wanted to go off of Henry's question. I don't know if that was answered, if any contingency is built in with any of these projects. It sounds like that answer is no, that this basically the number that we have budgeted, if bids come in high, we don't have a contingency built in. So just would like clarification on that. And then as far as the North Corridor 97 project and just coordination with ODOT, I think obviously right now we're busy with the prioritization, but Bob, I think it would be helpful if at a later meeting, if ODOT could just provide an overview presentation to the committee on just, I know it's a really big project. We're, you know, reworking 2 highways coming into the north side of Bend. And I know there's been a lot of changes going on, but I think it would help us on the committee just get a better idea on what the, you know, I know 5 million probably isn't a lot in terms of the scale of the project, but for, you know, it's quite a bit for the GO bond. So help us understanding where that money's going towards. And then on terms of east-west connections, I guess I would like to get some more information on what this feasibility study for the Midtown crossings is going to provide us, what information we don't already have. Because if only we can't, you know, we can't move forward on that right now, and we're waiting a long time for these, for waiting on this feasibility study. My question is, what if we just, you know, from what I've seen so far, there's kind of been more work put in to the Greenwood, Hawthorne, and Franklin than a lot of these other projects. And from what I've seen, maybe we can just start design on, say, Greenwood to actually get that built sometime soon. Like if we just, what if we just started on Greenwood? That seems like one of the more straightforward ones that, so that's one more. So.
Okay, of the list there, the contingency one might be helpful to everybody. So Sinclair or Ryan, at the planning level costs that we have that are driving these numbers and in the lists, is there contingency built into those?
There is some contingency built into the planning level costs. Yes, and then there's also inflation built in as well. So there's some play in the numbers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if I could jump in there, Joe, just real quick, because I think there was a good key question there. A good example of what Sinclair just highlighted, like, for example, when CTAC was going through this, we slated on average $3.5 million to build a roundabout from start to finish. We know we can do it for cheaper than that. So these all have a little bit of a buffer built into them. But and I'm happy if now's an appropriate time, I'd love to answer that question and provide a little more detail on the feasibility study if it's appropriate.
Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a great question. There's been a lot of evolution on what that looks like just in the last couple months. So coming out of the adoption of the TSP and out of the CTAC committee, one of the initial things that it said when addressing the Midtown crossing is the first step they want to see is a feasibility study be done. And so the intent of that feasibility study is to examine all 3 of those crossings, Franklin, Hawthorne, and Greenwood, because my gut's telling me, based on the amount of money we have set aside for all 3 of those, I don't know if we can fully fund the construction of all of them within the money allocated in the bond. So the intent of the feasibility study, which should be going out, we're finishing the RFP up in the next week. And I'm hoping it hits the street in the next couple months. And then we're looking to get some results back on that by spring of next year. But the goal of that feasibility study is to provide some background information to not only this committee, but to council, to basically say, here's a general concept of what each one of these could look like. Nothing set in stone yet, but here's one idea, and here's the rough cost of what that would be. There's already a lot of lobbying going on right now. If you saw City Council a couple months ago, there was a conglomerate that pitched the Hawthorne overcrossing to council, but at a cost of $35 million, which clearly we can't afford with the GEO bond alone. There's also some lobbying going on with some high potential for development along Franklin Avenue right now. And so they're asking, well, what can the city to commit to on Franklin that would initiate some development to happen in that core area, which would return some of that TIF money and kind of get the ball rolling. So really the intent of the feasibility study is at a very high level, just to say, we think each one of these crossings can roughly cost this much money. Therefore, committee, what do you recommend to council? And council, what would you like us to move forward with? Are we going to prioritize one or two of those crossings as the higher priority, because we think we can design and construct it within a certain time frame? Because the reality is we just can't afford to design and construct all three of them within the constraints of the money we have now. So the feasibility is really step one. And then that's a revisit with this group and with council to say, okay, based on this information, would you like us to proceed forward with all three, assuming we're going to find more money, or do you want us to make a priority list of which ones you want to see done first? And I see Councilor Campbell can probably add a little insight into that as well.
Thank you.
Barb, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I did want to remind everyone that there is also funding in the plan for redevelopment of the core area. So it is assumed that some TIFs, some of the tax increment financing that will be coming in for the core area will also help to fund those midtown crossings. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, hope that's helpful context. And that's the kind of thing I think that would be rolled into the memo that I think we're heading towards, so that there's description on these project allocations and has that context. Okay, Courtney and then Dave.
Hi, folks. Well, now that we've had a lot of comment, I agree with much of it, but I think it boils down to, this is a lot of content, and also really welcome information during the discussion that I know I need more time to process, and I'm probably not alone in that. And I wouldn't feel very comfortable going along voting in the final CIP.
Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Sorry,
Thank you,
I
Courtney.
apologize for the interruption again. I want to apologize to everybody. If we gave you the impression that this was the last chance and we are expecting a vote today, I apologize. It was a potential based on your agreements or disagreements with this, but we as staff, like we can meet as many times as you guys want to meet. We want to make you as comfortable as you can be. So I want to alleviate any pressure you may feel that we need to vote and decide on something today, because that was just a potential. That's not a necessity, and it's your committee. We're available to meet as many times as you want till you're ready to make that recommendation.
Okay, I think we are to Dave.
I wanted to thank you, Ryan, for those comments. I don't want us to be basically just a rubber stamp. I really want us to be able to have the time to, really hash these things out and explore, the issues that were raised by CTAC when they actually, put this whole project together, this whole proposal together. And so with that, I wanted to ask, there's one thing we haven't talked about at all today, and it's partly because we don't have all the scoring information in front of us, but we haven't talked about how any of these projects will actually demonstrate our commitment to equity. We've been talking a lot about construction, but we haven't talked about the equity piece. And I think that's important that we demonstrate to the community that, yeah, we are dedicated to equity, to biking and walking, to connecting east and west, and not only connecting east and west, but connecting northeast and southwest and northwest and southeast. Those diagonal, we don't have a sandy boulevard here like they do in Portland, but we do have, if you're in the southeast part of town, you need to go over to the northwest side. How am I going to get there? Let me think. You have to think it out because it's not easy. So anyway, that's what I wanted to say, and I do appreciate everybody's comments are right on. Thank you.
Okay. Let me do a couple others, Mason, and we'll come back to you. Barb, let's take yours and then go to Scott.
Thank you. I had a quick, simple question. I thought that the Neff and Purcell intersection was fully funded without bond funding, but I saw it on the list you're talking about today. So there's my question. Was I wrong? Is there a bond in that intersection?
You're not
Sinclair.
wrong. So that was just trying to work together with the Purcell Extension project.
Got it.
And that's just the name of the project.
Okay.
We already had a project name.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. Scott, please.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there. I think I don't want to speak for anyone else, a little bit of a consensus developing about we might need a little more time. I would really like to, there's already been some good thoughts thrown out about a couple of these projects. And I think in the spirit of, I would love to have us kind of have, if we're going to take more time, I don't know if that's the result, throw some ideas out here for tweaks or ideas that the community's liking, such that then we can put that back out to the public and get some feedback on that. Would be kind of my preferred course of action here. And on that note too, Dave was talking about the Sandy Boulevard, like the northeast, southeast, and there is a written comment and a comment during our public comment earlier here about, trying to bike from southeast into the core of town to get to those east-west connections. And I'm a little concerned that 9th Street is getting delayed. And I would, on the spirit of throwing some projects out there between our support of the Broadman-Mendez proposal and trying to make some of those connections along 15th. So there's a lot of stuff in that Reed Market project, the roundabout at 15th and Ferguson, the key route along 15th that could connect into that 9th Street portion of the Wilson project that sounds like it might be getting delayed. And that seems like something that might be obtainable to really make some progress on and get some of those complete corridors constructed in the near term here.
Okay. Mason, I think we're over to you now.
Thanks. And Ryan, thanks for that overview of the feasibility study. That's super helpful. And I think you said that when you said spring of 2022, is that when you're anticipating the feasibility study would be complete?
Yeah, we're still debating a little bit right now the level of public involvement we feel like we should take, knowing that we've got it supported in the TSP. It's supported by CTAC. Everybody here supports moving forward. So we're just trying to make sure we're not, negating the public's need and desire to influence that feasibility study. Because if we don't need to do that public influence piece, yeah, we can have something back in 6 months ready to share. But if we are going to include public info on the feasibility study, which again is a very high level, there's once you guys in council decide which one is the priority, then there's a full-blown public impact, public influence outreach effort to be made. So if we got to do that as a part of the feasibility study, though, it's going to take longer. That's just the way it is.
Yep, that makes sense. So I guess my follow-up question for that, personally, I think getting the feasibility study, just some facts on all three would be super helpful as soon as possible. and then do the public input. But just obviously after that, things with Midtown crossings are going to change a bunch. And so you've mentioned a bunch of times, and I guess this is part of just my understanding, the CIP. From what Sinclair has said, it sounds like there's a lot of flexibility here. But like if we come out of that feasibility study and it's like, hey, we want to get one of these done, let's do Greenwood ASAP with that. I guess my question would be how would that work? Because right now, we have those funds are, set for the Midtown crossings. It's kind of, a lot of the funds are more in 24, 25, 25, 26.
Yeah, and maybe we can reflect that better. Yeah, we fully intend that, like Sinclair said, we're expending $2 million right now that we got from the feds through the ARPA, the American Recovery Plan Act. So we're not spending any bond money on the feasibility study yet. We're focusing on spending that $2 million first. So we're going to get the feasibility study, and we're going to probably initiate design on as much of them as we can. But the intent, and we should show it accurately here in the CIP, is, yeah, if the recommendation is we've got some low-hanging fruit on Franklin or Greenwood, let's make sure there's a couple $1 million ready to execute that as soon as possible. Hawthorne is the longer lead time one, even as much as support as that has. I mean, it's going to be a great public outreach effort to, I was talking to the engineer at the city of Wilsonville just the other week, and they did something very similar over I-5. And it was a 2-year design process and public outreach process to get the community to agree upon the iconic bridge that they want to see as a crossing. And so I think it's going to be great, because I think we're going to love what this looks like at the end. But I think there's an opportunity on Franklin and Greenwood to get some of that low-hanging fruits, and then maybe consider how to get some of this additional funding that the Councilor Campbell had mentioned, as well as some TIF money and other stuff rolling in to fund Hawthorne.
Okay, and so just so I'm clear on how bond money works, basically we've got the CIP, and then so like each year biennium we've got a certain amount total, like 21, 22, we have a little over 5 million, 22, 23, 12 million. So that's kind of the max of GO bond money we could spend. So, but if there's I guess if there's some projects we don't spend at all, then there's some flexibility in how it spends it, but it's kind of like, that's the roof there for each biennium.
Yeah, and Sinclair could explain this too, but the idea was, we're assuming the debt issuance here in spring of 22, we're assuming another one in spring of 24. So what we got to make sure we do, say if this first one is 25, 27, 33, whatever it is, we need to make sure that, and we're required to spend a certain amount of that money before we can get another debt issuance. So we want to be careful that we're not, building ourselves too big of an expectation, because we honestly don't have a lot of things ready to spend money on today. We've got a lot of design work we need to do. And as it was said earlier, we're going to be hitting our stride, I think, once the spring 24 debt issuance is available. And that's when we're going to see a lot of construction dollars flowing out the door. So we got to be careful about this first one, that we're not overcommitting ourselves, because it's primarily going to be a lot of design work.
And then one clarification, once we do issue debt, that money is available immediately. So there is some flexibility in the implementation of the project.
Okay. Courtney, your hand might be up from previous. Am I correct on that? Yeah, okay, looks like it.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, okay, Leanne, over to you.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to kind of reiterate, I don't think I mentioned this earlier on the kind of Midtown crossing piece, that the estimates that are in the cut sheets currently, I think it's 11.5 million were allocated. When I say allocated, I think Sinclair had shared that was what city staff's best guess about how the Midtown crossing money was going to be spent between the 3 Midtown crossings. And I think it's just for this committee to be aware that that's just like staff's best guess. But in the cut sheets, it shows that 11.5 million was allocated for Hawthorne and 250,000 for each of Franklin and Greenwood. And so that's something that I want to be aware of as well in this committee as this work moves forward and this feasibility study moves forward, because you know, Brian, you mentioned, oh, we could like spend a couple million here, but, and I know that there's some synergistic funding that would also supplement that. But the reality is that like, there are a lot of behind the doors conversations happening that are, I think, shifting some of the money towards Hawthorne. And I just don't want to see the other crossings that we could see come to fruition for improvement on the ground for folks who need to go east to west, to get lost in that shuffle of Hawthorne. Because of that long trajectory piece of Hawthorne, like to make sure that like, you know, we can't wait till 2025, 2026 to get, you know, our monorail. Sorry, my Simpsons reference. And I want a monorail, but I mean, in the meantime, I just want to make sure that we're not losing sight of actual on the ground improvements. And then I would also love to hear from other folks from this committee, you know, things that people might want to shift around. You know, I know I've already mentioned potentially pushing back the Reed Market corridor. And this is where that 10-year picture would be really helpful, because maybe I don't feel so strongly if I know it's happening in 2027, right? But because I don't have that full picture right now, given this limited snapshot I have, my instinct is push back Reed Market, keep Bear Creek 27th, maybe we'll pull that one up, see how we can fit in only in a way that makes sense to allow this committee time to reassess based on the interceptor. I understand that Butler Market and Boyd Acres also involves that interceptor, and that's scheduled for 2023 and 2024. So I'm a little confused about how the central interceptor is impacting that and how that can be slated earlier. So yeah, I just like to also see it, you know, if we're looking at another meeting and a new proposal, what other committee members are looking at. And then I would still love to see at least on the table, and this is a council decision, but what does that larger financing package look like? And what are the benefits and risks? Because I understand staffing is an issue, but is there a way for us to shift the projects to make sure that the staffing looks like what the GeoBond anticipated? And that's something I don't have a full clear picture of.
Ryan, your hand came up. Something on those comments you want to add
Yes,
to?
Leanne hit on it again, that I would love to hear the feedback from the committee on this, because I'll be fully transparent here that my thinking on the Reed Market Bridge has evolved as I've had discussions with people since November of last year. So, and it can work either way. At the end of the day, it's going to be fine. But one of what I believe is the primary reasons that this bond passed was many of the things we've talked about here: the local improvements, the personal improvements in your neighborhoods, the bike routes, the key routes. But I also think that Reed Market itself was a big component for why the bond passed. And so what my original thinking was, let's get all this other stuff done. Let's build Reed Market Bridge at the end. But I'll admit that, you know, over the last year, the questions that I've gotten, a good majority of them to me personally have been, when are you going to build the bridge? And so if we do push Reed Market Bridge out to say start in 2027 or something like that, that's fine. But we need to make sure we have a good message and we can communicate that to the public, that, yeah, we know it's 8 years after the bond passed and we're just now starting to build the bridge, but our priorities were these other things first. So again, in my mind, and I think that's why we saw it reflected in the draft CIP here, is it kind of made sense to start that in the middle of this. But again, it's your recommendation. We can do it however we see fit. We just need to find that balance, because there are a lot of vehicle drivers out there who will be asking us, you know, when's the bridge getting done? When's the bridge getting done? So my thought had shifted from doing it at the end to doing it more to the middle. But yeah, if we, and I think it's an intriguing idea. I think Mason brought it up. Like, if we need to pull Reed apart, just like we did Ani, and if we need to consider Reed in multiple phases, maybe that helps with the message. And maybe like, yeah, we're going to build a bridge, but before we do that, we're going to improve 15th and Reed. We're going to do all this other stuff first. So I'll just kind of throw that question out there to see what everybody thinks.
Scott, something on Reed Market while we're on the topic?
Yeah, Brian, I appreciate your thoughts on that. And that's kind of, I mean, I think that's sort of what this whole process has been is all of these projects have been vetted to have some merit, right? That's how they got to this stage. So it's kind of hard to, something's got to be a priority. And that's where I think, all the work that you guys have put in and our feedback on that priority ranking really comes in. It's like, hey, yeah, that overpass has merit. It needs to be built, but we have these other projects we've got, there's been a lot of public engagement on, or in alignment with council goals. And in that sense, I do feel comfortable, like I suggesting, like maybe we do kind of look, okay, well, what about Reed Market? It's also ranked very high. What about that project is, let's dig into those rankings. And my interpretation, because Reed Market is a complete street already, it could be better, but it is a complete street, right? But there were, that 15th Street section, that roundabout with Ferguson, the 3rd in the Canal section, really elevated it into that upper echelon in terms of being a true multimodal project. And so I was kind of curious about, all those three things together, at least a few $1 million, it's big enough to bid out on its own, as opposed to once we start Reed, we're committed to, the full like $40, $50 million that, it's like, maybe there is some room to pull that apart into a couple projects if it gets all of our highest priority stuff done.
I want to close out on Reed thoughts. Sharon, is that what your comment was going to be on? Okay, let's go to you.
Thanks. I agree with Ryan that I think that there is a large segment of our community that is focused on getting the Reed Market project done. So we need to be mindful of that. But also, I like the idea of potentially breaking it up in a way that would be efficient, because one of the benefits for breaking up a really large construction project is that you maybe have an opportunity to have greater equity and minority contracting participation if it's not such a huge contract. So to the extent we want to make sure that we're building some equity consideration into this, focusing on maybe trying to get a greater percentage of minority contracting participation could be done if we do break up some of the bigger projects.
Okay. All right. Let's take a couple more and then I want to shift gears to public comments. We have time to close out after that. So Sinclair, did you have something on what was just said?
Yeah, just wanted to point out that a $40 million project does not take 10 times the staff time as a $4 million project. It probably takes twice the amount of time. So I just want to point out that if we do want to break up projects into smaller pieces, we're likely going to be spending lots more staff time. And there's going to be a lot more overhead associated with those projects. It's just something to keep in mind that if we want to be spending the most amount of money on projects, these projects should be on the larger scale.
And risk benefit was mentioned. I think that's a good example of kind of how that calculus is done. Okay, Mason.
Yeah, well, kind of tying into Reed Market and just the construction, I think it makes sense, to, block these into projects that would all get constructed at the same time. But if certain ones would be constructed at the same time as other, anyway, I'm specifically thinking about right now we have the Wilson Corridor project, and lumped into that is the 9th Avenue, and 9th is one of the 12 key routes that was promised to the public, but that isn't appearing in any of the lists, as far as where it's going to be spent, because from my conversations with the project manager for Wilson, Dee Dee Fraley, she said that it's unlikely that that won't be included with the Wilson Avenue corridor project construction. So I think that should be pulled out because it makes sense to do it during Reed Market. construction, which probably makes sense, but I think it should be pulled out of Wilson. Then that's also $1 million, over $1 million that's shown as, you know, in the bond being spent during Wilson. So I think that's just some coordination that might need to happen, and just having, I know there's a lot of flexibility in the CIP, but having it reflect, you know, again, try not to make too many changes that we know are going to have to change anyway beforehand.
Yeah, just to clarify, I mean, north of Wilson, we are including 9th Street as a part of the project, but you're talking about the stretch south between Wilson and Reed, right?
Yeah,
exactly. North of Wilson, there's like 30 grand or something for some restriping, but the real key route was Reed Market to Wilson. There's over $1 million allocated for that. But since it ties down to Reed Market, and that's obviously going to change a lot with the bridge, it makes, you know, and I think it makes complete sense, you know, maybe, but then I think we should change our CIP to reflect that.
Okay.
Leanne, did you have one more? Oh, I'm sorry, I jumped into it.
Oh, well, you can let Leanne go first.
Okay, I want to try and wrap up this part.
Yeah.
So let's try and get as specific on projects as we can.
Yeah, this is Wilson, Reed Market specific. And, you know, Ryan, you mentioned you had a lot of people asking you personally about Reed Market, but part of my assessment is going by what we're hearing from the public in the context of this committee. So if those folks aren't sharing their comments with the committee, that's not information we have. What I'm seeing through the public comment is a overwhelming amount of support for the Biped projects for east-west connectivity, in particular along, you know, only Midwest crossings. And so I would encourage those folks to submit their comment. I think we had one comment that said, you know, Reed Market over crossing, but you know, we can only go by what we hear in this space. And I know that, yes, Reed Market was part of what sold the bond, but there was no promises made during the GEO bond campaign about when that was going to happen. And I also want to acknowledge what Sinclair said, that, like, you know, and what you had mentioned about packaging it, right? If there's sections of this bigger bundle that we can do first that are smaller, low-hanging fruit pieces that are still considered part of this, like $40 million. Let's make sure that folks understand really specifically what that's for, because when we look at this construction schedule, all we see is, you know, Reed Market corridor, $3 million. But let's say we say the intention, maybe this is part of the memo, is that we're addressing like the, you know, Reed Market and third connection to the canal trail, right? That will go a long way for folks who said, you know, we want biped infrastructure, to understand that this could be helping that. But without that context, I think you're going to have maybe a little fire on both sides. So,
okay. Mason, to you, and then we'll go to public comment.
Okay, yeah, this is another specific project one on the Archie Briggs crossing, and Bob, you might be able to help answer this. But in the cut sheet, obviously this is tied to the ODOT replacement of the of Archie Briggs. But my understanding is replacing the bridge, reconstructing the roadway there for the bridge, but then that includes the Deschutes River Trail crossing of Archie Bridge. So we have a small $500,000 in the bond to do a safe crossing of the street there. So, and based on the cut sheet, we have, there's that we've just got that $500,000 in the bond for the safe crossing for I would anticipate would be for construction. And then there was over $800,000 already allocated in state and local funds to be spent on design. And so, but then when we look at the CIP, we have spending $100,000, and then $300 during construction. So again, we weren't provided with anticipated design windows and construction windows, but I read that to be spending $200 on design, $300 on construction. So my question is why are we spending $200 on design when there's already over $800,000 allocated?
Sinclair, can you feedback on that? Or maybe we have to follow up.
It's my understanding that that trail crossing is not included in the package for the Archie Briggs design. So it would be additional money.
Bob, do you have any, can you provide any clarification on that?
Yeah, the only thing we have for the Archie Briggs project right now is just the bridge replacement. We've had some tentative discussions with the city about maybe there's a chance to coordinate, but this is a federally funded local agency project just for the bridge replacement right now. That doesn't mean we can't add other funds, but I'm not sure exactly what you've seen as totals or breakdown, but we're just working on the bridge reconstruction right now.
Okay, yeah, any more information to provide on that would be helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I saw another hand come up. Scott, quick one.
Yeah, quick one. I just wanted, we really zero in on those crossings, and it's a perplexing problem because there doesn't seem to be quite enough money to do everything we want to do. But just drawing attention, there's intersection improvements that I didn't see discussed, and I know that it's going to make sense to do them with crossing likely at 2nd and Greenwood and 2nd and Franklin and 4th and Franklin. There's a few $1 million there. So I don't want to get in the situation where we have the study and it's like, oh, hey, we can get going on some low hanging fruit on Franklin or Greenwood. Oh, and it would make sense to do this other, these other improvements along, say, Franklin corridor. And you're like, oh, but we didn't really kind of leave space in the 5-year CIP to get that done. So just sort of drawing attention. I don't know if that Franklin corridor was that wasn't represented anywhere, was it? Or where did you intend for that to go?
So the Franklin corridor, it's got a whole bunch of different components to it. And it's not necessarily guided by the GeoBond always. So there's intersection improvements, there's lighting improvements, there's key route pieces to it, there's greenways, ADA improvements. It's pretty complicated and has a whole bunch of funding to it. So it was shown in kind of that light orange as possible interim improvements during the phase where we're kind of ramping up to the big Midtown Crossings project.
Okay, so it was represented in the general Midtown Crossings there.
Yeah.
All right, that's helpful. Thank you.
Okay, let's shift gears, but come back in a moment. Mary, question to you. Do we have anybody in the queue for public comment?
Well, when you were discussing the Archie Briggs, David Abbas had his hand up, and David, I don't know if you're still interested in speaking to that.
Hey, Mary, yeah, I could add to it just real quick. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, David.
And Bob Townsend kind of touched on it, but that's a local bridge funding, federal dollars, and it's for design only. Of the bridge. We have been able to work into that project, working with ODOT, and that RFP should be out in a couple of weeks to include a sidewalk connection on the west side up to the DRT, Deschutes River Trail, as well as to the east, connecting into some existing neighborhood. But I think the idea with trying to sync up this GeoBond safe crossing improvement of the DRT with that same kind of construction timeline is really looking for those efficiencies and synergies, right? If we're going to be their mobilized contractor, impacting traffic patterns, that would be the time to do those improvements and potentially, include those improvements with that same contract once that is dialed in some more.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, David.
Yep, you bet.
Appreciate
it. We do? Okay, go ahead.
2 people. So I see a Chase Drum. Let's see. Go ahead and state your first and last name, even though I just did for you.
Thank you. Yes, my name is Chase Drum. Chase just like the bank and Drum just like the instrument. So I just want to say my apologies. I was a little bit late hopping on this call today. But really great to hear everything that everyone's working on. And I think this is just a great opportunity in general as a person who loves driving, but also walks and bikes really frequently. And so I think the one thing I just wanted to kind of comment is personally, I've been just driving off of kind of Wilson quite a bit. And I was really excited when I heard that this is going to have the opportunity for the Wilson corridor to be expanded, especially east and west. And I just wanted take the moment and just say I drive it pretty frequently and also bike it. So the opportunity to see this be made more effectively for locals to cross east and west, I'm really excited about. I just wanted to share that interest to see that hopefully this moves forward, because lately I have seen quite a few bikers when I'm driving kind of really struggling since part of it when you're crossing isn't always on 3rd Street isn't really well marked. So I just wanted to share my interest as a Bendite about hoping that especially comes to fruition, along with any improvements that were just mentioned about Franklin as well.
Okay, thanks, Chase. And we have Gina. Go ahead, Gina.
Hi, this is Gina Franzosa again. I spoke at the beginning. Thanks for allowing me to speak again. I forgot to disclose at the beginning too. I'm also, another hat I wear in the community here is I'm the Transportation and Land Use Chair for the River West Neighborhood Association. And so I have a kind of a general comment and then some specific comments. But my general comment at first is I strive to keep my board at the Neighborhood Association and our members aware of the bond and bond funding and projects. And it was very frustrating to me last week to see the proposed list of projects and feel like I had to really react because this project on Portland was proposed. And I have very little information to share with my board about it. The description of the project is minimal. And then also the timing of it was very rapid. And Northwest Bend, I don't know if you've been driving around Northwest Bend lately, but there's a lot of construction going on. And so literally, if this project were to happen, as well as we hear there's a project on Galveston proposed, Northwest Bend in the River West neighborhood would be under construction for over 10 straight years. And that's a really long time. And maybe we're backlogged, but that's a really long time. So I just hope that there is someone at some level of the city that is looking at this high level kind of construction activity in neighborhoods of the city and can respond to that. And so that's my general comment. And then on a specific level, I appreciated the comments about pushing the Reed Market project out. I know it's very frustrating for people, but there's also an opportunity. And I work all over the town, but the on and off ramps to 97 and Murphy is an opportunity that was pushed later in the project schedule, but maybe that could be pushed up if Reed Market is pushed out. So I encourage the community and the city staff to kind of look at all the projects from a big picture level, and not to belabor the point, but I think a full project schedule of all the bond projects, even if the later years have to be drafted, really needs to be put together, and that needs to be provided to the community and the committee. Also, I would appreciate some clarity on the local residential street safety. I understand neighborhood associations around the community put a lot of effort into identifying projects to improve street safety in neighborhoods. And I believe that's the underpinning for what projects are getting funded, but I can't figure out how, and I see a couple projects in River West are getting funded in like the first $750,000 of the bond that's going to be spent, but I have no idea what projects those are. So how do I find that out? How does any neighborhood association find that out? I'd really appreciate a response on that one actually directly. And then lastly, I just want to say, the Midtown Crossing feasibility study, to the extent that the city can inform the committee here about how that Midtown Crossing feasibility study is going, initial findings, the scope of the contractors that are doing that feasibility study, I think that would be really, really useful information. This is, if you ever try to ride your bike or walk across town, you're taking your life in your hands to go through Midtown, frankly. And no matter what,
if you could summarize, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. I think the feasibility study should be shared with the committee so that they can, help to guide it if that's possible.
Okay.
Thank you, Gina. Okay, we have one more, Brian. Go ahead and state your first and last name. Can you hear me, Brian?
Oh, there we are. Sorry about that.
My name is Brian Kennedy, and a couple of comments quickly. One, regards to the Reed Market Corridor being pushed out, I could certainly understand how that could be warranted due to the size and complexity of it. But I think that any conversation that included that idea should include the uncoupling of the other associated projects, which would bring significant benefit to the community in those areas, because they really could be done separately than that major project and would have immediate impact. So I would like those two to be kept in the thinking in the regard of pushing that project out. Additionally, early in this meeting, there was, and we were the prioritization of the projects. I was somewhat surprised. If I got it correctly, it sounded like the connectivity with the parkway at the south end of this town was really low on the list. And that somewhat goes hand in hand with the Reed Market Corridor. Southeast is so heavily dependent on the Reed Market Corridor. And yet we've got this Murphy Road extension going through, but it doesn't connect all the way to the parkway in a seamless way. And I'm surprised that we wouldn't want to alleviate some of the pressure off of the Reed Market Corridor by making those improvements more of a priority. So those are the two comments I wanted to bring up.
Thank you, Brian. That's all I
Anybody
see.
else, Mary? Okay.
No, that's all I see.
Okay, so let's come back to the check-in that we want to do. The check-in questions were, is TBOC ready to vote on a recommendation to council? And I think we've heard the answer to that. So I guess that's the high level. I'm hearing that correctly, right? That we want to take some more time and address what we've heard tonight. Yep, smiles and head nods, couple of thumbs up. Okay. So staff, Sinclair and Ryan, I'm going to try and summarize some of the key points. I won't get 100%, but I want you to be thinking about how much time you would like to work on this, so we can have some expectation of a next meeting. So we're heading towards a CIP memo that describes the rationale behind the timing of the projects. And we're going to take another meeting to review that. And of course, all our meetings are just distribution of information for the public to read in advance. And here's my running list of projects, pretty much kind of in the order that they came up. Discussion of only about either why it's out in the years it is, or what work can be done sooner rather than later. So that's part of a Central Interceptor story, I imagine, that's being discussed there. Reed Market Road, its timing, and could it be phased? What ideas does the team have for phasing? Just a more background item here, North Corridor. People got a good briefing on that tonight, but to the extent we can provide information about what the North Corridor big project is all about. A general category of how equity is being addressed in the CIP. And I would add to that some sort of summary how east-west and north-south ped bike connectivity is being advanced. As you can see, this is a mix of topics and specific projects. And in that last summary, how key routes are being advanced. Reconsideration of a 9th Street delay, and it was the section south of Wilson, I think, that was being referenced there. Acknowledge that the Midtown feasibility study will identify some potential low-hanging fruit and some clarity on timing of what improvements might be done. kind of a big one here, information about the 10-year picture. And I would, I guess, footnote that with level of detail to be defined. There's a lot of level of detail thinking into the collection of projects for the first 5 years. I guess I'm curious myself as to what level of clarity can be done with perhaps not the same full detail on the 10-year picture. Benefits and risks of a larger package. Clarity on Archie Briggs on what the bond money would be spent on, as opposed to the mix of dollars going into it. And that's my list, just trying to highlight things. There may be some others that I missed, but it's a fairly comprehensive list of things to describe the rationale for and to provide some contextual information about. So we don't have a table that staff can kick me under the table here for all of that, but let's throw it over to Sinclair and Ryan on what you would see on packaging that up, responsiveness on all that, and what do you think the timing is?
Go ahead, Sinclair.
Yeah. Sense of the timing.
Yeah, I would just say if we're going to get back on our regular routine of the last Tuesday of every month, as you mentioned, Joe, we want to share information out to the public in advance so they have time to digest that. My gut's telling me I don't think we can answer all of those questions in time to distribute the information to the public before an October 26th meeting.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So the question is, we can start to do that, but what will October 26th look like? And then, a potential November meeting that I think I'm hearing now is, we could certainly have this all done by a November meeting. Do we want to entertain the idea of going the first week in November and maybe we can get this predominantly complete before an early November meeting?
Right. That target would be do the staff work, distribute the packet on the 26th of October, heading towards a November 2nd meeting. You want to build in a little cushion on the theory that quality beats speed.
Yeah, I know. Again, we're setting our own time frame here, right? So I don't want anybody on TBOC to feel rushed. We've generally circled a December date in which we would like to be in front of council for the adoption of a CIP. So I think we're still fine in the big picture. So I'm not sure what an October 26th meeting agenda would look like, short of us not having all of these answers back. I think we could do some good damage if we held off to a November meeting. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'd probably prefer pushing it to more mid-November, but I know this is not convenient for the committee to be jumping days back and forth. But I think from a staff perspective, the more towards mid-November we get, the better product I think we're all going to get. So
yeah, let's take a couple comments on next steps and then come back to the calendar side of it. Kim, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I just had a thought. One thing that's occurred to me throughout all these meetings, we've had a lot of time spent on presentations, which have been really fantastic, and then direct question and answers between committee members and staff. But we haven't really had any opportunity for discussion between the committee members. And I'm wondering whether our next scheduled meeting, whether we'd be able to spend some time doing that and whether that would be of value.
I saw a couple head nods to the notion of doing in the virtual world. It takes a little different form than the table, but I think if that were the kind of the meeting mode you wanted to be in, we certainly could design the meeting to make it happen in combination with what we've been doing so far. Okay, Leanne, thought from you?
Yeah, just one, Kim, that's a great idea. And I know that there are some committee members that we hear from a little bit more than others. And so I think as an agenda item, it would be great to have a check-in with each committee member to make sure that everyone's having their voice heard. From a more procedural point of view, I'm looking at the calendar, and I know that Sinclair had me block off a couple different dates for a council work session, one of which was November 17th. And I think I would be pushing more towards a Tuesday, November 9th date to avoid the Thanksgiving holiday, give city staff a little bit of breathing space, because I know that we've just asked for a whole lot of information, and I feel for you, but still potentially gets us into that November 17th work session,
Right.
To keep us on track with our original timing.
Yeah, that would be TBOC reconvening on November 9th is what you're suggesting. Yeah, that gives a full month for staff to work on the package. Chris.
Yeah, and really for Sinclair and Ryan, but hard to have the side conversations in the middle of one of these meetings. The Reed Market potential unbundling, I just plant the seed that some of the work that's planned to look at detour analysis and travel patterns, and that might help piece everything together around that area. There might be some warrant to doing some technical work on that now to help answer some of these questions. Yeah. So I just wanted you to be thinking about that before you committed to, we'll bring everything back at a certain date.
Right. Okay. Melanie, over to you.
Thanks. I just have to run, and I think we're coming to the end here, but I got to drop off. I just want to say thanks again to everybody participating on this committee and volunteering your time for this very important discussion. I totally support taking the time that you need to get through all the information. And I really appreciate how conscientious everyone is being about public involvement and giving public time to process this information as well. So I will look for the future calendar invites.
Okay. Barb, something on process moving ahead?
Ditto to all of that. Thanks so much, everybody. The one comment I had, I particularly noticed Ryan, I'm looking at you, saying, whether or not we're going to put something off. Yeah, but I am a procrastinator. I put things off all the time. But, this list of projects, nothing's being put off. We've known, all along that these projects could not be done within, a single construct, not even within 5 years. And, all along our job has been to try and sequence them. It's not putting something off in the same sense of we really don't want to do this thing, right. Not excited about this or that one, because you're absolutely right. They all have public support. They've all been extensively vetted. So I know that does not make your job any easier, but thank you. And mostly I agree with Melanie. Yes, take the time you need. These meetings absolutely are very expensive, but the worst result would be rubber stamping at the end of very expensive meetings. We want this budget, these meetings going to good, worthwhile discussion. And I just appreciate all of you, engaging, wanting to spend more time. So thanks, everybody.
Okay. So for closure, I'm going to put on the table the idea of reconvening on November 9th. The direction to staff is basically to write it up. My list was just to give you a sense of the breadth of issues. We'll leave it to staff to hone in on those and organize and clarify them. And we would approach November 9th as an action meeting. So we'd be looking for short lists of changes and to follow the meeting design ideas that we had to have some cross committee member discussion and also some roundtable input as well. Okay, so thumbs up if you agree with that approach as next step. Sharon, voting members only. All right, I'm seeing thumbs up all around. I'll count Sharon's as well. Courtney, you have your camera off, but I'll assume you're okay with it based on your comments earlier.
Yes, thumbs up.
Yeah, okay. All right, so I would propose that's our direction. And Sinclair, anything last from you or Ryan? Okay, good job, everybody. Then we are adjourned.
Yeah. Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thank
See you on the
you.
9th.
Thanks,
Looking
everybody.
forward to see what you guys bring.
Thank you.
Thanks for all your work.
Also, good luck, Mason. I know any day now we'll be looking for baby pictures.
Yeah.